My name is Jennifer Owen-White, and I am proud to be the Refuge Manager for the Valle de Oro National Wildlife Refuge in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I would like to start today by humbly acknowledging that the Valle de Oro National Wildlife Refuge occupies 570 acres of the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Tiwa people. We acknowledge that the Tiwa people have stewarded these lands for generations, and in the case of Valle de Oro, continue to play a vital role in our refuge's protection, restoration, and stewardship. I'm excited to be here with you today as our kickoff for the Arctic Refuge Virtual Bird Festival, and I am honored to be joined by Subhankar Banerjee, Professor of Art and Ecology at the University of New Mexico. We are going to get started with a bit of a conversation between Subhankar and myself, but I did want to let you know that we are looking forward to seeing your comments, and if you have questions for us, please type in some questions in the feed and we will try to get to them as we move through the conversation and as we finish a couple things we'd like to chat about. So I'll pass it over to you, Subhankar.
It's great to be with you, Jennifer. It's a true honor and pleasure. You have always been so generous with our students at UNM. So starting with this conversation and the other events taking place today and throughout the week in Alaska, in New Mexico, and other states, we will be celebrating the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and its connection to other national wildlife refuges all across the country. The now imperiled Arctic Refuge Coastal Plain is a biological nursery of global significance, a place the Gwich'in people call the sacred place where life begins, and the indigenous Inupiaq people call home. But I'd like to begin by asking you, Jennifer, a little bit about the National Wildlife Refuge system. While the public, hundreds of millions, know more about, appreciate, and enjoy spending time in national parks, the national monuments, and national forests, hiking, camping, they know, relatively speaking, less about the crown jewels of our conservation system, the 567 national wildlife refuges strewn all across our nation. Can you tell us a little bit about the significance of the National Wildlife Refuge system, especially now as the biodiversity crisis continues to deepen and the United Nations says that 1 million animal and plant species face extinction due to human activity?
Well, I love how you call it the crown jewel of our conservation work and our conservation system. I may be a little biased because I wear this uniform and this logo every day, but I think the National Wildlife Refuge System is such a huge benefit and such an important part of the work that is being done for conservation here in the US. Our mission is to administer this national network of lands and waters for conservation and management and restoration, especially in the case of Valle de Oro, restoration of fish, wildlife, plant resources, their habitats, for the benefit of present and future generations. And so the cool thing about the National Wildlife Refuge System is that we have a purpose that's different from any other public lands. We really are focused on wildlife conservation. Everything we do on national wildlife refuges and the reasons that refuges were established and even the recreational activities that we offer are all linked to protecting, conserving, and restoring habitats and wildlife. And every refuge has its own purpose. You mentioned there are 567 national wildlife refuges, and we all have a different charge, but aiming towards one big goal of protecting the resources of the United States. And some refuges are about migratory birds. We're really celebrating that this week, migratory birds. And if you looked at a map, you could see refuges lining up along bird migration flyways like the Pacific and the Central and Mississippi and Atlantic. And some other refuges protect endangered species or critical habitat. Some refuges, such as in the case of Valle de Oro, like our urban refuges, are really about deepening connections to the outdoors and helping to create an informed and involved citizenry who really understands the impacts that we're having on wildlife and habitats and really takes action to protect them. I said, I think I may be a little biased, but the National Wildlife Refuge System is the crown jewel of conservation, and each of these refuges across the country is doing just amazing things. And I'm so proud that this week that we're partnering to help people connect more with the Arctic Refuge.
Thank you for clarifying that. So when it comes to mitigating the biodiversity crisis, we are very, very grateful that our National Wildlife Refuge System is really the most important mechanism for starting that process. So from that large National Wildlife Refuge System, we could not have picked two refuges that are more different. 19.6 million acres, the Arctic Refuge is the largest, and at 70 acres, as you earlier mentioned, Jennifer, the Valle de Oro is one of the smallest. The Arctic Refuge is likely the remotest, with the nearest major city, Fairbanks, nearly 400 miles away, while the Valle de Oro is in Albuquerque, the largest city in New Mexico. The Arctic Refuge is really wild, and I have experienced it in all seasons with polar bears and caribou and so many other wild creatures running all over the place. While the Valle de Oro is a human-made place, an ongoing project of rewilding. Can you tell us why we should talk about these two places together and what connect these two places and why and how?
Definitely. Well, you know, as I mentioned, our role at Valle de Oro is about engaging our community and working hand in hand with our neighbors to deepen connections with conservation in the outdoors so that we can get excited and really get to work on the needed conservation work of our country. And so we like to think of part of our role at Valle de Oro as a gateway to the entire refuge system. We are opening windows and helping to deepen those connections with refuges all across the country. So when we get to be here today and connect people to a place that's so wild and so far off, such as the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, that's a big deal for us. We hear about it in the news a lot. We might hear it referred to as ANWR, and we always want to call it the Arctic Refuge, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And you may think that it's just this remote place that's so far away, but what we know and what we've been learning is that we're really closely connected. So I want to tell you a little bit of a story. About a year ago, I got an email from the refuge management up at Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and their biologists telling me that they had some exciting news to share with us. They had been doing some research on cackling geese, which are a migratory goose. They kind of look like Canada geese, but a little bit smaller. And they had been putting GPS collars on these geese. And in 2018 and 2019, they ended up putting collars on, I think, 16 geese. And they tried to follow them to see where they were migrating to and what their migration looked like. And as I mentioned before, the National Wildlife Refuge System, we have these refuges all up and down these major migratory routes. So it's really cool to watch a bird who's migrating from all the way up in the Arctic to somewhere down south and see where they stop along the way. And protecting land along the way is so important. But the coolest thing that we found out was that 3 of these geese, they were able to track their full migration pattern all the way down south and all the way back north. And they found that these 3 geese went from the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 2 of the geese came to Valle de Oro National Wildlife Refuge. So we're only 570 acres, but 2 geese traveled from one refuge all the way up at Arctic, all the way down here to visit us. The other one was hanging out on, I think, some sports fields at West Mesa High School. And these geese know the connection. They know that they need Arctic for their nesting, and they need it for reproduction, and they know that they need Valle de Oro and all the little places along the way for their migration and for spending the winter. And so we often think of Valle de Oro as a place that is about education and outreach, but we have a biological value as well. And it's so exciting for us to see that we're contributing to a bigger wildlife story. And it's really exciting for us to be able to tell the story. So if you're participating with us this week as part of the Arctic Virtual Bird Fest, make sure you check out the cool story that we're going to share, I think this Wednesday, telling you all the details about these geese. The big picture is decisions that we make here about land use, about native plants, about the use of our resources, about our community voting and the way that we make decisions have impact beyond just our community here. What we do here in Albuquerque is impacting wildlife that's traveling all over the United States. And what we do here impacts global issues like habitat loss and threats from non-native species and climate change. So we may be thought of as just an educational resource, but we have a biological value, and the cackling geese know the connection between Arctic and Valle de Oro, and now we're excited to share it with all of you.
Thank you, Jennifer. You know, I spent so much time in the Arctic Refuge, but neither did I know about, nor did I think about the cackling goose. So, and you remember my first public talk after I joined UNM in 2016 was at the Valle de Oro National Wildlife Refuge, and I spoke about the two connections through the migration of the snow geese that connect our places, two places. But when I first learned about the cackling goose from you and park ranger Hannah Redwood, I was just so thrilled that they are coming right here in Albuquerque. So I did a little bit of research and found out that they're in size somewhere between brand geese and Canada geese. I knew both of the other two, but I didn't know about cackling. And apparently their head is a little bit more rounded or flat, and the beak is shorter, something like that. But anyway, thank you so much for sharing that the connection is biological. There is a material biological connection, and that brings the idea of care and compassion and why we need to be stewards of places near and far. So when the Arctic Refuge, I'll switch the subject slightly, bringing kind of the idea of people and establishment, or how conservation, the process of conservation works. When the Arctic Refuge was first established in 1960, the original indigenous human inhabitants of the place, the Gwich'in people and the Inupiat people, were neither consulted nor named in the public land order 2214, signed into law by then Secretary of the Interior Fred Seaton, which was an exemplary case of colonial conservation. Today, of course, the Arctic Refuge is a place where incredible amount of intersectional community engaged work going on. But the story of Valle de Oro is quite different. It was built with community participation and with great care and attention for environmental justice. And for that, Jennifer, I honor your extraordinary work. You are probably my favorite refuge manager in the whole of this country. Can you speak about the significance of involving community members and including environmental justice at the inception of a land and species conservation initiative?
I think we've learned a lot in the years since the establishment of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to the establishment of Valle de Oro. Back in 2010, the refuge system underwent this big visioning process called Conserving the Future. And we started thinking about how we wanted to relate with the people that we serve. We realized that we are the Fish and Wildlife Service of the United States, and how do we serve the people of the United States? And a big part of that was this urban initiative, but it was also about community-based conservation. And so I'm really excited that Valle de Oro gets to be one of the models for how we are building refuges hand in hand with our communities. I would be remiss if I didn't say that Valle de Oro would not exist if it were not for the passionate people who fought to protect the land, the people of Mountain View, of the South Valley, of the Pueblo of Isleta, of Albuquerque in general. Valle de Oro is in a highly industrial neighborhood, and we have multiple Superfund sites and EPA regulated facilities. And our neighbors were tired of fighting against industry and wanted to fight for something. And they may not have known what a National Wildlife Refuge is, just like you mentioned. Many people aren't familiar with what jewels these places are, but they fought hard to protect this land. And Valle de Oro would not exist if it weren't for those people. So when I became refuge manager about 8 months after the refuge was established, I knew that my charge was not to build a refuge by myself. My responsibility was to be a facilitator, to help community members envision what they wanted to happen on the land, to put their ideas together with sound science and engineering that creates something that's sustainable for wildlife and people, to really give honor and learn as much as I can about the environmental justice and the grassroots activism that our neighborhood is known for, and to incorporate that into the work that we do. So we're proud to be a model for prioritizing community involvement in every step of the way, from the establishment of the refuge to the designs of the restoration, to the education and outreach programs we're going to offer, to the exhibits that we're putting in our new visitor center and the design of our visitor center. It takes a lot of work, but there's no way that it isn't the most beneficial, most successful, and the right way to do our work. We work in service to both wildlife and the people of the United States. I work for my community, and so my job is to hear their voice and make sure that I am carrying their intent out as best I can when building this refuge. We, of course, are the first public land site, we think the first public land site in the nation to have our own site-specific environmental and economic justice strategic plan to focus on early, meaningful, and ongoing involvement of people in decisions that are going to affect their lives. The environment isn't just national parks or open space or national wildlife refuges. The environment is everywhere we live, work, go to school, recreate. And so it's important that people are involved in those decisions. And I'm really proud of what we're doing.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. And if a few people may know this, that two of the leading figures of environmental justice in our nation, Richard Moore and Sophia Martinez, both live in South Valley. Both have been involved closely with your initiatives. I also want to take this moment to honor the extraordinary work of our community organization, Friends of the Valle de Oro National Wildlife Refuge, and its executive director, Erin LaBrake. Thank you all so much for all that you are doing. Conservation is community, and that's what you are showing. You are building a model that can serve the whole nation, not just our small refuge in our hometown, but it's a model for the whole nation. So that brings us to the next and the last question. Often you have said that you consider Valle de Oro as a place where members of our community would come to enjoy, to learn, to get inspired about conservation, and then return to their neighborhoods and revitalize their neighborhoods, revitalize urban ecology. So can you speak about the significance of an urban wildlife refuge and its significance in biodiversity conservation at this very moment of intensifying biodiversity crisis? How can the public engage?
Yeah, so we mentioned the National Wildlife Refuge System, and so many of these refuges are in rural and remote areas, and you might have to plan and take a vacation or plan a lot to go visit them. And we're hoping with a place like Valle de Oro that people can be involved more often, that they can come to the refuge if you have an afternoon free or you're looking for something to do on the weekend. And really what we want to do is inspire action at the most local level in your own backyard, on the regional level and a national level. So things that I would say that you can do are, of course, be involved with Valle de Oro and watch us help the refuge grow, physically come volunteer and help plant the plants and build the trails and be a part of establishing this refuge that is leading the way for community-based conservation. And for our viewers who are all across the country or maybe in Canada, you can still follow Valle de Oro on our social media, and we post something every week called Transformation Thursday that tells you about what's happening on the refuge. As you mentioned, we have an amazing nonprofit support group called the Friends of Valle de Oro. They were some of the people who helped establish our refuge. They were neighbors who lived around the area who wanted to protect this land. And they formed a friends group before we even had a refuge. And they have a really amazing program called the ABQ Backyard Refuge Program, which helps you learn about creating native habitat and supporting wildlife in your own backyard. Just like refuges are this whole string of places that migratory wildlife can stop on their movements north and south, within our communities, we need those wildlife corridors as well, and you can help make that in your own backyard. So I hope that people can go to ABQ Backyard Refuge.org to learn more about the Backyard Refuge Program. It's free, it's accessible, it has ideas if you have an acre of land, if you have a small backyard, or if you live in an apartment and you just have a patio or a window. And the last thing I would say is that we really want to help create an informed and involved citizenry. And so what we would like to see and urge you all to do, which I know many of you have done recently, is to vote, to be educated about what the issues are with conservation and to take action, to write to your local and national leaders and speak up for wildlife who doesn't always have a voice. Speak up for habitats. The plants don't talk that loud and we need our voices to carry for them. So be involved in your local refuge, whether it's Valle de Oro or whatever refuge is nearby you. Think about your backyard habitat and what kind of refuge you can provide, and get involved in those issues locally, nationally. Be informed and involved.